Thank you.
All right, I will get an eye on the chat just in
Okay.
case.
So we will start with our opening prayers here. It's this sheet. In this first prayer, which says taking refuge in generating bodhicitta, what we want to do is sort of imagine that in the space around us are countless sentient beings representing all the life forms and sentient life forms that exist throughout the entire universe. We're just, and what we are developing is a sense of connection with all of these beings. And then in the space in front of us, we're imagining Buddha Shakyamuni, looks like this up here, is in the space in front of us, radiating light out towards us and all sentient beings. And what Buddha Shakyamuni represents is a safe direction that we can take in our life, developing causes and conditions and actions that we take and thoughts that we take and the way we speak that will help us to develop happiness, good relationships, and avoid any kind of suffering and bad relationships and all the things that we just seem to just happen and we don't know how that happens. And what the safe direction that the Buddha is offering is something that we all inherently, or I shouldn't say inherently, that we all innately are constantly experiencing, and that is called a dependently arising nature. Dependently arising nature of all things, all phenomena, including consciousness and all other phenomena. It's constantly, everything is constantly changing in ways that we can't see, but it's due to, it's a dependent arising due to causes and conditions. So when we are not aware of the direction that we're taking, and we're not even thinking about the direction we're taking, there can be very, very many disturbing causes and conditions that we are sort of accumulating. And this is what causes all of our problems. So the safe direction that the Buddha is representing is a direction that through mind training and training of your habitual propensities, you can find a way to actually achieve a lasting happiness, and a lasting happiness that will benefit others as well. So that's what we're sort of imagining, as the Buddha is sending light out to all of us and all sentient beings, that we are thinking about making this choice of taking this safe direction in our life. And enlightenment, when it says I take refuge until I'm enlightenment, is saying I'm taking a safe direction in my life until I achieve the actual state where I am able to be completely happy and benefit all beings. And that's what enlightenment is talking about. Completely happy, completely wise, and able to benefit all beings. This is what the Buddha is saying we can accomplish. So we'll say this prayer in English, and then two times in English, and then those of us who know it will chant it in the Tibetan transliteration. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye chodang sogi chognam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi, dagi jinso gipe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye druparsho. Sangye chodang sogi chognam la, Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi, dagi jinso gipe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye druparsho. Now there are actually many Buddhas. It's not just one Buddha. And so now what we're doing is these various Buddhas represent different aspects of enlightenment. So now what we're going to imagine in front of us is what the Buddha that is called the Buddha Chenrezig. That is the Buddha of compassion. And the Buddha Chenrezig, we imagine, is made out of white light. And all of these images are like the nature of, like when we see a rainbow in the sky, a very brilliant rainbow, it is sort of transparent and rainbow-like light. There are colors, but it's nothing that we can actually cling on to or grasp or that is solid. And what this represents is that there is the constant dependently arising nature of what things are is not, you cannot actually grasp it. It's changing moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. And if you get into physics, this is actually true. You get down to the level, the basic level of what we think appears so solid, and it's actually just energy. It's energy. So this is how we're imagining these beings, these enlightened beings, as light energy. So Chenrezig represents these four, what they call four immeasurable qualities. It's immeasurable love, and that is, the measurable love is the wish, may you be happy. That's all love is in Buddhism, may you be happy. Then there is immeasurable compassion. And in Buddhism, what that means is, it's the wish, may you not suffer. That's all. So how we can get very caught up on what love is and the compassion. And it's just, in Buddhism, it's very, very clear. Love is may you be happy. Compassion is may you not suffer. Then there is what is called immeasurable joy. And that wish is that may you, as we were talking about in this first prayer, may you make the choice in your life to create the causes and conditions based on guidance by those who understand what those causes and conditions are. May you be guided to make the choice in your life to develop causes and conditions that are going to lead you to real joy, real happiness that is free from suffering. So there's an immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, this immeasurable joy that you make these choices in your life. And then there is a measurable equanimity. And the measurable equanimity is that the Buddha Chenrezig sees that all sentient beings are the same. We are all the same in that we have a dependently arising nature in us that is we're capable of getting ourselves out of the muck and mud of our afflictive, disturbing emotions and our cognitive obscurations that we don't understand what's going on, and that we're able to get out of that and then follow a pathway that will develop into the blossoming of this wonderful being that we are all capable of being. And that is what this immeasurable equanimity is about. So as we're thinking of trying to keep all of that in mind, the mantra that goes with the Buddha Chenrezig is a very familiar one to many, many, many people who they've heard it around the world. It's Om Mani Padme Hum. And it's basically may out of your nature, may this wonderful being arise. Like a lotus that comes out of the mud. That's Om Mani Padme Hum. So we'll just say that several times. Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. And try to think that you yourself are sending that out to everyone you know, all beings you know. May they be happy. May they not suffer. May they achieve that state that is completely free from suffering. So then we go to another prayer. Hey, Myra, hi. This is called this prayer has 7 aspects to it. They call it 7 limbs. And
Oh, yeah, that's scary.
it is an outline basically of a larger practice that can be done, but this is just sort of a prayer that outlines it. And it's a way that you can basically develop your positive qualities, increase your positive qualities, and increase your and remove your negative qualities. sort of purify your negative thought, the things that you don't like about yourself that you want to get rid of that seems so persistent and that's the way I am. This is a method when you get into the actual practice of what this prayer is outlining. It's a method of increasing your positive qualities and removing those ones that you just really would rather not have and wish to be rid of. And it is actually, as to those of us who do this practice, it is pretty powerful. And it does begin over time to change the way you actually think, the way you speak, the way you behave. So what's really going on here is you just visualize again, you visualize the Buddha's in the sky in front of you, like this rainbow light, sending out all this light. Then all these other sort of enlightened beings and beings that are there who are highly realized and have only the wish to help you. Only the wish to help you along this path to happiness, really. And you're saying this prayer as you imagine them in front of you. We'll just recite it in English. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. So the great enlightenment is sort of saying that all sentient beings can eventually have this kind of enlightenment, this immeasurable joy of enlightenment. And the word samsara, what said, please stay until samsara ends. In Buddhism, they just like as we can see, as we look around in the yard, we can see there is a cyclic existence. We look into nature, we see there's a cyclic existence. Things grow from a seed, they come into existence, they grow, they mature, they die, they create seeds again, and the seeds go down into the dark ground, and then with the right causes and conditions, they come up again. It's a cycle. You see this with living beings, animals, humans, it's a cycle. It's a cycle. So this cyclic existence is something that the Buddha says our consciousnesses are kind of trapped in it, and they're trapped in a kind of suffering that arises because of cyclic existence, and which is why this prayer is saying, please remain with us until cyclic existence ends, and all sentient beings who are sort of trapped in the suffering that occurs through the ignorance of what's going on in cyclic existence can be liberated from that and be truly happy and sort of coexist in a very wholesome, interdependent way that's beneficial for everybody concerned. And that's what this very last prayer is about. It says the mandala offering. And what we are imagining here is a system, a world system, a universal system in which all consciousness and form is aware of the interdependent nature of how everything exists, and aware that suffering arises by not seeing and understanding that interdependent nature. And so we're imagining that a system, a universal system where everyone is aware of this interdependent nature and is working in a very harmonious way that develops a wholesome kind of interdependence that is not harmful to any being. And that's what this prayer is. We're imagining and making this an offering to the enlightened beings in the merit field. Zajipaki Jokshim Medo Tramri Rablingji Nidegen Bhakti Sangye Jindu Videru Rokunam Dachinga Chapasho. Then we take this imagined universe, this wonderful, interdependent, wholesome universe, and we send it as an offering into the hearts of all of the highly realized beings who are there in consciousness before us. And we say, Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Yiriyataya. So those are our opening prayers, for those of you who are totally new to this. Today, what we're studying we're studying a text. It's called Precious Garland, and it's by um, a follower of Buddhism who lived in the first century CE and had quite a long life, and understood completely the Buddhas. The Buddha Shakyamuni was on this planet over 2,500 years ago. But Nagarjuna came along, and it was part of the lineage of the Buddha's teachings and the teachers who passed it down, orally. And Nagarjuna really understood the wisdom teachings of the Buddha, Buddha Shakyamuni, the teachings that talk about the nature of the reality of our existence, and not just our existence, but consciousness, matter, how everything actually exists, the nature of that. Nagarjuna is, and continues to be the foremost proponent and of that wisdom understanding of the Buddhists. So this text is gets into some very, very deep and profound levels, and we're getting closer and closer to that as we move into the text. And what I thought I would do today is, before we get into those levels, to go over some concepts that we've already discussed. Yeah.
I just want to quickly interject a overall thing and see if this makes sense to you, that in general, the reason we're striving to have a profound understanding of the nature of reality as it is because that correct view of existence then informs our psychological habitual propensity. So we stop doing things that are out of alignment with reality.
With reality, yeah.
So, I mean, I've been thinking about this lately, so. In general, I mean, that's the point of studying the nature of reality,
Of course.
because the nature of that understanding then makes your mental and physical behaviors, your speech and so forth, the actions you take become motivated or driven by a habitual mind stream. Your mind stream changes to be in alignment with reality, as opposed to, it's sort of like Gollum,
Yeah,
like,
fighting
me
against
mine,
it.
I mean mine, I mean mine.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sort of reduces down to that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the there is another Buddha which we didn't talk about the prayer for that Buddha in the opening prayers. However, that particular Buddha is the Buddha that represents the wisdom that Shakyamuni Buddha talked about. And what we're trying to do is understand the nature of reality here, the nature of how things exist. Because if we are ignorant of that nature and are acting out of our ignorance, then our actions are not in alignment with reality. And that is what is actually causing all of our suffering. That's what's causing all the unhappiness and the suffering.
I want to say something about that too.
Mhm.
Because we were talking earlier about relieving from suffering. Is it the case do I understand this correctly? All suffering is coming from our delusional, habitual patterns. Again, our psychological and then the behaviors. So the suffering is not like something that's happening to us from out there, but the suffering is arising as we're experiencing it because of our delusional habituation towards a certain.
And those are delusions. Our ignorance of reality is what causes us to take actions that are out of alignment with that. That creates consequences. In Buddhism, it's called karma, the actions and the consequences to those actions. So the actions that are out of alignment with the interdependent nature of the way things actually are, and we know our actions are out of alignment with that very often. That is what causes sort of a blowback that we get of frustration, anger, jealousy, hatred, attack, all of the things that, and we get worked up thinking it's their fault, they did it, somebody out there is causing me to react this way. And what's really going on is our ignorance of the way things actually are is causing us to react. And that's, yeah.
Well, I mean, one could potentially argue that you can say, I understand emptiness, I understand dependent origination, I understand, and so from my own perspective, I have my mind trained that sees this correct view. But there are still others who will take actions that could be both harmful or beneficial to you. You don't control those other individuals. You can control how you react to them. And I suppose as a bodhisattva, you probably could react, not react, and just say, my life is gone, it's gone, and I'll be back some other time.
Right. And that is the power that you can actually have if you understand clearly what this path is about.
But if somebody else takes an action towards you, that, I mean, I was thinking, for example, I don't know why, but yesterday, the day before, some people walked into the grocery store in Arkansas and ended up dead. Because there was a shooter that walked in and, just shot these people. I mean, they didn't actively put themselves in a position to be in danger. They just ended up being in danger. Now you could argue, okay, their karma is the reason they ended up in that situation. But there's still some other actions that people can take that still impact you in ways that you aren't necessarily, that you can still have the appropriate view, but those people can still take those actions.
Right. And the way when we were talking, when I was
sorry. So I guess my main point is I don't know if I really want to go as far as saying everything is because of the way we see things or interpret.
You have to take a much longer view of our
Okay,
existence.
I was gonna interrupt this.
Okay.
This is a really good point, Brian. Do you remember when Gandhi was assassinated? I forget his last words, but it was something like "I love you" or something. He looks at the assassins. There's also a woman who was imprisoned wrongfully for like 35 years for a murder that she didn't commit. This was someone in Scotland that Venerable Robina often talks about. And at a certain point, she was wrongfully imprisoned. Her husband was actually sentenced to death because they were accused jointly for doing something they didn't do. So he was put to death. And she decided at a certain point, okay, there's absolutely nothing I can do about this, but I can, rather than be angry, I can say to myself, okay, I'm not in a prison, I'm in a hermitage, and they weren't a Buddhist, but they turned it into something that was not anger or not how dare this happen to me, but they turned it into. So it's not that a bodhisattva or a person who had, it's not that we won't have someone assassinate us or harm us or call us bad names or cheat us or steal from us. It's not that changes. What the benefit of understanding what is the big picture is, first of all, you won't take it personally because they're not doing it to you. When another being harms you, when you reach this level, they're propelled by their negative propensities to harm me. And so one Lama says the only reaction to have is empathy and forgiveness, because even though you can get gunned down, and that will continue to happen, if you don't, I was going to go back one more step. If you don't accept karma as a fact, cause and effect is a fact, and reincarnation and multiple lifetimes, you can't. This path will just fall apart. Could because an argument such as the one you just gave, or the point you just made, which is very true. You can be all enlightened you want, and someone can still murder you.
Yeah,
Or
and-
earthquake could still happen to you. Anyway, I just wanted to point that stuff out.
Yeah, what I would say right here
Brian
is,
Nichols has something to add.
okay, go ahead, no, please.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, you're absolutely right about karma and rebirth, and that, one of the very first classes I took, where we took a deep dive, and it was logical proof of karma, because that was so central, like using logical argument to, like, because if you can't get there, then all kind of things
Yeah,
just don't make sense,
just fall apart.
and because that was a tough one for me, but yeah, and then there's a whole set of teachings, the Lojong teachings, which are mind training. There's a whole set of teachings that are essentially roughly translated as taking adversity onto the path, which is when those crappy things happen, when those things you can't avoid, you know, whether you're being assassinated, you know, how do you respond in a way that is most beneficial for the development of your mind? And by, you know, and there's stories of Tibetan monks right before being assassinated saying, you know, may I take the negative karma of these people onto myself and suffer this for them and give them all my, it's yeah, it's not that it necessarily changed that they were assassinated, but again, if you believe in rebirth, if you believe in the gradual development of the mind, that creates tremendous merit that will lead to more and more ability, one, to avoid those situations and to help others out of those situations. Is that kind of where you were going?
Yeah.
with it, you know?
I mean, I think something that Dalai Lama always will say is that, and Christopher just mentioned, you have to take the long view, because
Yeah,
there's a way in which it feels hopeless, because you can
Oh.
say, okay, maybe I can help help. I'm just thinking now as Kavita,
yeah,
help one or two people connect to a path that expands their view and ultimately will lead, to increasing levels of not good feelings, but how the hell, do I deal with this whole planet? And you really have to take a big view. The other thing is, I mean, it's weird to imagine, I kind of fantasize about what would it all seem like if I was enlightened? And it just feels like you would feel so much sorrow for, it's sort of like a bunch of kids who drew pictures of dragons in kindergarten, then they all freaked out and are all panicking because of all this mess that they created for themselves.
Well, I'm not sure it's sadness. You as an enlightened being, you would know how to help them, what to say, to sort of set them in a trajectory
I
that
suppose,
would. Yeah, so I don't believe it would be actually sadness. I think it would just be, how do I benefit this? How
although
do I
there's
benefit such a-
that whole story of Chenrezig and the thousand arms and constantly helping and essentially getting to that point of not hopelessness, but it's just so overwhelming and shed a tear, and that is from which Tara is born.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, you can do it, keep going, and so there are stories that address that.
That's what you just get your ropes in.
Right.
Tara emerges.
Right, to say, no, keep going.
Tara is another entity,
Emanation.
another character in the pantheon of Buddhism.
So anyway, what we're going to talk today about is not belief. We're not, nobody is saying you need to believe this. It's important, before we even go any further into this text, is that we have a correct understanding of what some of the concepts are that the Buddha has presented. And it is not about, the question here is we need not think we have to have some kind of debate over whether this is true or not true, and whether we believe it or we don't believe it. Because that's not how you would go about any hypothesis. So you take the Buddha's view or presentation simply as a hypothesis of how things are according to the Buddha. So you just take belief out of it, and what we want to now do is look at the specific things with that eye of going, all right, let me see if I can understand this hypothesis, examine it in a way that you systematically examine all of the pieces of this and see if from within that hypothesis, anything is starting to make sense, you know? And the ultimate thing is it has to be proven to be valid and reliable. And the only way in something like this, a spiritual path that's like this, is that you have to engage in it and you prove it to yourself. You can't make anybody believe it. And there are reasons why we don't believe it, and the Buddha presents those reasons. But we have to seriously look at those reasons before we just say, I don't believe that. Because we have to be, we have to think more, almost like a the scientific method. You know, the Venerable Robina Corton always says, the Buddha's expertise is the mind. And I completely agree with her, because if when we're talking about the study of the mind and its processes, what we're talking about is psychology. And so there's a huge aspect of Buddhism, maybe all of it, which is psychology. It's about the study of the mind, about our the habits that we form, the propensities that we have, the things that trigger our anger, the things that trigger our grasping, the things that trigger our fear and our guilt. These are all occurring at the level of the mind, at the level of psychology, you know? And how do the Buddhist teachings are about how do you look into that and see what it is you're actually doing? What's going on? What is the ignorance there that is causing all of this to keep occurring without us being able to figure out how to shift it, change it, get it to a point where we're no longer being triggered in these ways that are very disturbing to us, you know? And to others, and are causing relationship problems, physical harm, all kinds of things. You just look at the world and you can see that's the case. So that's what we're trying to do today. I would say just suspend any idea of belief or disbelief and look at it in terms of this is a hypothesis of how the mind is, what's going on with the mind, what's going on with the body, what's going on with our experience of what we're calling our existence. Yeah. So, and I wanted to do this before we get into I mean, Nagarjuna is going into some pretty damn deep stuff in terms of this wisdom path and the topic of emptiness. And I think before we get into that, I want us to be pretty clear about some of these things that we haven't necessarily been clear about. So the Buddha's first public teaching, I've talked about this before, is the first public teaching that he gave, right after he had achieved enlightenment, had attained the state of enlightenment and had that enlightenment experience, was given at a park in India called Deer Park in Sarnath, India. And he gave a very, very concise, I mean, he put his experience, his path, into a very, very concise formula. And it was his experience, his pathway of his psychological pathway, the pathway of his consciousness, the psychological pathway that he took to achieve this level of enlightenment. And so he was presenting this to his very first audience. And what he had these 4 ways that he talked about it, and they're called the 4 noble truths. Now, noble is a very specific term that we're talking about here. It does, noble in Sanskrit, the word is Arya, and it refers to a very high-level type of being who has had a direct realization of the nature of reality through a complete process of training, concentration, meditation, purifying their negative, afflictive emotions, developing positive ones. It's a process to become that kind of being, that highly realized being that has a direct realization of emptiness. That's what these 4 truths are referring to. That's why they're called noble truths. Not just because they're, they're good, they're noble. It's referring to noble truths for those beings who have had that realization, that direct realization of the nature of reality. So the first noble truth the Buddha said, that he just said, there's suffering, folks, it exists. He acknowledged it. He said there's suffering, we all recognize there's suffering, there are all kinds of levels of suffering. There's physical suffering, emotional suffering, mental suffering. There are all kinds of suffering. And he acknowledged it. So right there, I think he got everybody's attention. He didn't say, oh, don't worry, just, believe in me and everything's gonna be fine. He never ever said that. He never ever said believe in me. Actually, belief is simply a mental acceptance of something as being valid. But I know, all of us know, many of us know from our own experience that there are many, many beliefs out there that have absolutely no validity to them at all, because there is no direct experience or proof of any reason why that belief would be true. It's simply a belief, and believing something does not make it so, and the Buddha knows this. Believing something does not make it so. So sort of my suggestion is throw belief out the window and don't worry about it. Really worry about it. What is he saying? And what does it mean? What does it actually mean? So the second noble truth was that suffering has a cause. He says there's a reason why this occurs. It's not just random. There is a cause to this suffering. And then the third noble truth was suffering can be ceased in such a way that it will never return again, that it will be irreversible. There will be no more suffering in your mind and in your being. And that's quite a claim. And then he said, and finally, the fourth noble truth is there is a pathway of consciousness, a psychological pathway of consciousness that will step by step take you to this point where you will achieve that cessation of suffering. So right there, that's quite an amazing claim he's making. The Buddha's not saying, I'm going to do it for you. He's saying, this is what I did, and I'm offering you, this psychological pathway. Try it and see what you think. So it's a completely different mode of a spiritual practice than what most of us are used to from the way we were brought up. The way we were brought up is say, believe in this particular thing and you will be okay. You disobey this particular thing and you're going to be punished. And the Buddha never says that. He says it's all occurring in our own psychological makeup. So there are called types of suffering that one of these beings, these Arya beings, can see. They can see, they can see gross suffering and they can see the levels of subtle suffering. What is actually what we would think of ordinary beings like us who don't have that kind of realization of the nature of reality. We can see things that we think, I want that, I like that, I desire that. And somebody who has had a direct realization of what reality actually is can see the very subtle suffering involved in that, because they see that we're getting ourselves attached and drawn to something and craving something. And if we don't get that, we're going to experience some kind of frustration. It's a level of suffering, actually, frustration. Suffering has many different kinds of levels. And if somebody actually got in the way of us getting that thing we wanted, we could actually behave in a way that would be very harmful, not only to us, but to the other people. Downright anger, hatred, and attack. Because we were attached to a certain kind of thing, and that thing didn't happen. So the Arya beings can see these subtle levels of suffering, which we would think, well, that's not suffering, that's something I want, I want that. I want that hit from I want to smoke my pot. I want to have my drink. I want to get drunk. It feels good. And we don't see where it actually goes, where it can lead. We don't initially see that until it's too late. And then there we are, smack dab in the middle of some horrible relationship, which we thought was going to be great, or we're addicted to something. We had no intention to become addicted to something, and it's causing us tremendous suffering. So this is all part of the truth of what suffering is. So with the second noble truth, the Buddha explained that the origin of our suffering lies in ignorance. That is the origin. Ignorance is what causes our suffering. And it is an ignorance of the way things actually exist. And this gets into some concepts that we've had a lot of trouble with, and I'm going to try to tackle them so that we can at least, maybe we'll still have trouble with them, but at least we can see some, maybe some logic in what the Buddha is saying. So the Buddha actually said, so out of this ignorance of the way things exist, there is a primordial ignorance. It's what we would call ego self-grasping. We develop, then this is primordial. So the Buddha is saying this goes back, he says, to beginningless time, and we're going to talk about beginningless time. This goes back to beginningless time. The Buddha says, he said, all beings, this includes the Buddhas, all beings arise from I grasping. They arise from this ignorant I grasping, such that they grasp at I and mine. This is mine. It's like, and we've talked about this before, it's like you take a whole, if the nature of reality is that everything is interconnected, everything is interdependent, and this is the way it functions. And it really does function that way. We can see even with suffering, it's interdependent. Look at the world. Wars don't start just out of nowhere. They arise due to causes and conditions and dependent arisings. So interdependence is just a given. That's just the way, that's base level what existence is. It is interdependent and dependent arisings. Now, those dependent arisings can generate, this idea that, well, I want what I want. I want my little part of this interdependent system. I want it to be my little section of it. And that's that's me, that's the ego. This ego self-grasping that grasps at me and mine. So we don't even have to believe it. This is just laying out what he's saying. So the ego self-grasping ignorance tenaciously clings to the idea then of not an interdependent, self-existent, interdependent, interconnected being. It clings to the idea of a independent, self-existent me and mine. It perceives itself as a separate and independent thing, being that exists independently and separately of everything else. That's the way the ego, our ignorant ego self-grasping conceives of ourselves, as if we exist somehow separated off within ourselves, really actually independent of everything else. We can interact with everything else, but we don't feel as if we are actually part of, interconnected, dependently arising with everything else. We feel a little closed off and separate and protective of me and mine. Not a little, actually, a lot.
So let me ask you.
Yeah.
So, and maybe this is a bit definitional. But like everything else, your ego is also dependently arising.
Yes.
Although your ego seems to be fundamentally arisen and.
This is where we will get into beginninglessness, which is a tough concept for us. And I actually don't know why. When I actually looked at it, it makes
Just keep
so
going.
much sense. Okay.
Wait, there's another question.
Well, you should just let him get through.
No, go, no.
No, I just wanted to say something about the definition of independent, non-changing. Something that's independent.
That's right. It's not affected by
So, but
causes and conditions. That's what it
that's
is.
just not reality.
That is not
Even
reality.
in our conventional reality, it's not reality.
Even in our conventional reality, that's not true. And yet we will cling tenaciously to that idea that I'm independent. We think it's a virtue, you know? And the Buddha is saying this is primordial in us. So again, in order to follow the Buddha's reasoning, we have to take into account within his hypothesis that there is such a thing as cyclic existence, and life forms and consciousnesses keep cycling around. And now all we have to do is just look around, and we will see that in our world. Where we have the problem is we think, yeah, but I'm not the one. When I die, I'm gone, over. Somebody else will get born. There'll be a new consciousness. Buddha says there is no such thing as a new consciousness. This again goes back to beginninglessness, which is, we're going to have to discuss it. But all these, but basically what he's saying is, so if we think about, the deer now are having babies. These are new babies. You would think, oh, these are new consciousnesses. But according to the Buddha, it said, no, these are not new consciousness. This is cyclic existence. Things keep getting recycled, and I shouldn't even say recycled. They are constantly changing and developing. Everything is constantly, because dependent arising is so. Everything actually is arising in a dependent way. So change is a given. Change, there is nothing that is permanent. Everything is constantly moment to moment to moment to moment changing. Thankfully, right now, we have levels of physics that are proving this to be so. Nothing is solid the way we think it is, and everything is constantly changing moment to moment. We kind of know this because we can see how things deteriorate if we don't maintain them. Moment to moment, even the most solid thing that we think would be there forever eventually will be gone because of impermanence and change. So these consciousnesses that we cling to so tenaciously, they are constantly changing. So consciousness can leave one life form, they die or whatever it may be, right? They die, really. And be reborn into another life form. That consciousness is not going to go, oh, if I'm born a deer, I'm not going to be in a deer body going, oh, I used to be Christopher and I lived, here in this house, and now look at me, I'm Bambi, That's not going to happen. The life form, the brain, and everything that the consciousness interfaces with when it enters that particular being does not carry those memories with it. Only in the most rare cases that you hear about on YouTube, where you see this little kid who remembers, being shot down in the Pacific during World War II and then reborn, and he keeps having these bad dreams about being shot down. That's very rare, very unusual. That's a very strong traumatic event that for some reason the consciousness could not let go of. But in all of our cases, I would imagine none of us grew up. We probably grew up in kind of a fog until we were about, 3 or so, and then started to realize we were somebody. And we were basically just accepting what people called us, I'm the name they're telling me, I'm the kind of being they're telling me. We just accepted that. We didn't have a memory of who we were. The Buddha is saying it's not a new consciousness. This is what cyclic existence is, and we see it all around us. We see it in universal systems, we see it in the weather, we see it in the nature, we see it everywhere.
The reincarnated lamas have been higher, where they identify, so.
Right.
That's.
Those, what we're talking about then, in that case, are beings who are already on this path. They are waking up, basically. They have practices there are death process practices that these meditators go through. So they don't lose their consciousness as it's occurring. They know the process they're going through because they've been practicing it. Some of these high yogis actually go through the death process, and they come back out of the death process.
But there is remembrance.
Yeah,
There is.
yeah,
For instance, if you think of
yeah.
the current Dalai Lama, they went looking for him based on some dreams that they would have. So when they reached the house and they reached this little boy, the little boy didn't know he was the Dalai Lama. The little boy basically was living, Tenzin Gyatso was living in his little house with his family and his brothers and sister. And they brought items that had belonged to the previous Dalai Lama. And the little boy was very attracted to those, and he really, it's almost as if he could recognize them in
He
some
said
way.
mine.
And he would say mine.
He grabbed things in mine.
Yeah, so what they then did,
Did you get?
what they then did is they laid out several versions of the same kind of thing. Three malas, 3 pairs of glasses, and asked him to pick out, what was mine.
Which
Anyway,
ones were yours?
which ones were yours? And he goes, oh, this is mine, this is mine. He picked out all the ones that had belonged to the previous Dalai Lama. And that's how they realized that was him. He didn't realize he was that person. He didn't come in going, I'm the Dalai Lama. That's not how it worked.
I don't know if you've noticed, if you've watched recently some of his teachings, as he gets older, he is increasingly talking about experiences, and
Yeah.
he recently just mentioned basically that he has memories now of being King of Trizon Betson.
Yeah, right.
And others, which
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah, I know.
it's
It is
interesting.
interesting, I agree.
Because
I
they
wonder
typically
why-
don't talk about these kinds of things,
No.
but
I think
And
it's
now
trying to
he's
give us a
saying-
little hope.
Now
Yeah,
he's saying,
I
he's
think
telling
so
us
too.
how long he's gonna live, so
Yeah.
that, because there's a
Yeah,
real
I
fear.
these memories.
Yeah,
Feel that he's has access to.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, so that all is interesting, just, again, we don't have to believe it.
Right, file it away.
File it away.
Something, too, he kind of vaguely remembered being at Vulture Peak when.
Mhm.
I don't remember that, he said that.
Yeah, being in the presence.
Did he say that? Well,
Yeah.
Slowly.
okay. Who knows, right?
Who knows? Yeah.
So,
I want, as we're discussing this, not only do things need to be proved, but if you're going to say that's not true, then you need to be able to disprove it.
Yeah.
So the weight of evidence has to go in both ways.
in this case, the things have to be proven from our own experience.
Yeah.
Nobody is going to be able to prove this to us. We're going to have to prove it to ourselves through our experience. We try out some of the practices and begin to see this is making a change. This is making a change in me, And I can definitely say that. I don't know that I could have said that in the first couple of years that we were studying. I was just kind of overwhelmed by all the information, But over time, over whatever, 19, 20 years, I can definitely see that there's a change that has occurred. And I understand why that change occurred, and I know how that change occurred. It's a psychological change, basically.
So let me go back to this question
Yeah.
again about reincarnation and consciousness. And so, when you have a reincarnated Lama, if I understand what you're saying, then it's not that the Lama themselves or himself or actually remembers their previous life, it's that their behavior and their philosophies or thoughts or teachings or whatever are consistent with what the previous individual might have expressed. In other words, I'm trying to square away the fact that consciousness is a dependent arising, that you're not Christopher in the next life, but yet there is some way that these consciousness from these high yogis or whatever seems to move through life and seems to be recognized by people or individuals as that consciousness.
Right. This goes back to this whole idea that we've been talking about in some of these practices, like the 7 limb practice, where we are thinking about the habitual propensities that we have in our mental continuum. We have habitual propensities that are for particular kinds of things. We all know this about ourselves. So the idea is you want to be, we want to be sort of removing the ones that are causing trouble and replace those with the opposite propensities that would be beneficial. So somebody like Dalai Lama, for instance, who has been studying Buddhism, is going to have certain kinds of habitual propensities. And that child coming in that's reborn will take those propensities, not necessarily be consciously aware that they were the Dalai Lama and they worked on getting these particular propensities. They studied and all this, but they just would have them. And particularly when they're talking about very, very personal items that belonged to that consciousness in a previous, just the previous lifetime that they're talking about in terms of the succession of Dalai Lamas. That little boy said, oh, that's mine. It recognized, just because it was such a personal, so close to them. It would be like, I don't know. I really don't know. It'd be like if you died and you had a teddy bear that you had all the time, and you kept with it your whole life and you're really attached to the teddy bear. And then when you're reborn, somebody shows you that teddy bear and you go, I recognize that, that's mine, because you're so accustomed to it.
But you're saying it's a habituation and not a consciousness. I guess this is where.
It's these are imprinted into your conscious continuum.
I know this one's hard for me particularly because I haven't experienced this, but my understanding is the yogis develop the ability to remain awake and aware.
That's right, through the process.
Like, when they go to sleep at night, they don't forget what happened in their sleep. When you reach a certain kind of mental clarity and mental flexibility, pliancy, whatever, even in our current lifetime, if we were a completely accomplished meditators, when we went to sleep at night, we would not forget. It would be a continual awareness. And so, as far as I understand it anyway, when you get developed to a particular, to that level of mental clarity, it's not only propensities and only habituation, but there is some element of, the element of continued intention, if you will.
Yeah.
So like they always talk about Lama Zopa. He was born in this village. He passed away last year or 2 years ago now. And as a little baby, when he was out playing as a toddler and his mom and dad maybe weren't noticing what was going on, he would crawl up to the hermitage, which happened to be up the mountain from where they lived. And, he wanted to go up there, and he started doing gardening and taking care of this place that he used to live at.
It almost is like instinct.
And he kind of knew, and he referred to himself as, the monk now known as. He never said, I'm Lama Zopa. He said, the monk known as.
Yeah. Even as a little kid.
So I think there is the possibility at a certain state of development where it's not only habituation, but I don't know that. That's what I've read.
Yeah, basically what the Buddha is talking about is the unlimited power of our mind, the unlimited power of consciousness that we have not even tapped. We haven't really developed it. In our ignorance, we've been basically letting ourselves be led by our own, what we want, what we desire, what we need. And then when we don't get what we want, then we get angry. We're like little kids kicking and screaming, and we've been sort of lazy. The thing that actually will bring us to a thought system like this is that we feel at some level that we don't really want to go on in this way. We don't want to go on with this kind of suffering, this continual, up and down and the grasping and the clinging and the craving and the hating and the anger and the fighting and the blah, blah, blah. And we just are tired of it. We're tired of the suffering and kind of are thinking, there's got to be a better way. And I think that's what brings the very few people that come to Buddhism to this thought system, because it is saying, you know what, there is a better way. You can give it a try if you like, and in that part is completely up to us. We have to test the hypothesis for ourselves and see. Or we don't, we go, no, this is not floating my boat, and I'll go to something else, which is absolutely fine. You know, the Buddhism is not trying to win converts. They just want people to be happy. So because the Buddha, I mean, because this ego, this ignorant ego, this beginningless ignorance of the ego self-grasping, perceives itself as separate and independent from everything else, a personal sense of neediness arises in the ego. One of the characteristics of our egos is that they are needy. And I think maybe we know people who are very, very needy, and you can see it's almost like they're just get away from me. You need so much. It becomes off-putting when somebody is that needy. They're grasping, I want, I want. So the ego, this sense of neediness and lack arises in what the Buddha is calling this ignorant ego. Those external entities and objects that seem to satisfy the ego's needs and alleviate its sense of lack, the ego develops attachment for those external things. The greater the satisfaction and pleasure derived from the external object or entity, whatever or whoever it may be, the stronger the ego's attachment to it, and the stronger the craving for it becomes, and the more real that thing becomes to them. The more real that particular object or substance or person or car or house or job or career, whatever it is, the attachment becomes very, very strong, and they need it and they want it. Those external entities and objects that block the ego from getting what it wants and feels it needs, or that increase its sense of neediness and lack, the ego will develop aversion towards that. The ego doesn't like the thing that's going to block what it wants or get in the way of what it needs or take away something that it thinks it belongs to them, to the ego. So the greater the dissatisfaction and displeasure derived from the external object or entity, whoever or whatever that thing may be, the stronger the ego's aversion to it, the stronger the hatred, the stronger the anger, and the stronger the fear toward that object becomes. And that will, yeah, so that's just, we're kind of following a step-by-step process of what's going on with ego self-grasping. So then, based on its own personal feelings of attachment and aversion toward other entities and objects of its awareness, the ego develops personal biases and habitual tendencies, which influence its judgments, reactions, and personal decisions about everything. So these habitual tendencies that we all have, or our habitual things that we crave and desire, they're all very, very, very personal. You know, we can be attached to something that we think is just so wonderful and delicious, and oh my God, and somebody else will look at it and go, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see that at all. That right there tells you that from that object's own side, it doesn't even exist that way. It's coming from the neediness and the personal biases that arise from our own mind, our own consciousness. It's not in the object itself. It's in the way we see that object, the way what we think it means to us, the satisfaction it gives us, or the dissatisfaction it causes us. And it's all going on. This is a psychological process. It's all going on in our consciousness, in our mind. So these self-centered personal biases and habitual tendencies compel the ego to engage in actions of body, speech, and mind that cause harm to others and as well as itself. These harmful actions then generate negative imprints, what they call karmic imprints. Karma simply means action. So these harmful actions generate negative karmic imprints upon our within our mental continuum and the subtle energies of the being that the ego calls I or me. And these negative karmic imprints and propensities are carried within that being's the ego's mental continuum until they either yield a result of suffering for that person or are transformed and purified with positive actions that can offset or nullify them for that person. It comes down to the choices that we make. Are we going to follow? Are we going to follow these imprints that are generated by our ego, or are we going to try and grab a hold of it and say, wait a minute, this is not actually what I want, and I can transform this and I can change it. And that is what the Buddha is talking about when the Buddha is talking about a pathway of consciousness that's going to lead, what were you laughing? Something funny.
I just took a picture of Brian in his meditative state and texted it to him. Sorry, a little ADD. moment.
I'm listening, I'm just paying attention, soaking it in.
All right, now we go to beginningless time, because,
I just.
any
I
questions
have
about any of this?
hopeful that when Venerable Robina talks about this thing that happens when your attachment doesn't get what it wants. Saying aversion is a very nice.
Aversion is an
fancy
umbrella
word.
for all of it.
I think we ought to, it would be more helpful in terms of our personal taking it on board and our personal psychological work to think of it as rage. Anger.
Well,
Well, no, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's wrong to sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
According to
we have a blanket of
wait a minute, hold,
socially
Kabir.
accepted behaviors,
Yeah.
but
But the
honestly,
Buddha is not simply talking about rage. The Buddha is talking about
know.
a whole spectrum of what fits into a category called aversion,
Let's just-
which goes from mild dissatisfaction to rage and killing and torture and the things that we think are unbearably
I
hard.
just think that everything can escalate to rage. Road rage is a good example. You
We-
piss me off,
Right,
you know, one person will go,
that rage is just
another
under the
person will
surface.
go,
That rage is just under the surface.
Yeah,
waiting.
that's the
Be-
point I was trying
the
to.
reason it's just under the surface is that this is a beginningless ego grasping ignorance that we have. It has come with us, it's cycled through cyclic existence and the various forms that our consciousness has taken. This is all, this is Buddhist theory, not to be believed. Just the various forms that our consciousness has taken. This ego thing has been in there, part of it. So we can develop quite animalistic rage. The kind of thing that we would never think that we were capable of, but it comes out with the right trigger. The right trigger is going to make that arise in us in a way that can even be startling to ourselves. The level of rage that we have. But it is a whole gamut, and we shouldn't mistake minor frustration as being nothing to worry about, because underneath minor frustration, the rage is there, waiting for the trigger, and that minor frustration is going to turn into rage. Yeah, so we should be aware of that we actually have that within us, but there is something, that we can do about it, and that is these are these pathways of psychological consciousness and methods of working ourselves out of that. So now we are going to go to beginningless time and the concept of a first cause. Okay, because this, this is one of the questions everybody asks who is new to Buddhism.
And old Buddhism.
And you still run around in circles. So I decided I'm actually going to noodle this out and see what you all think. According to the Buddha, ego self-grasping ignorance has existed in all sentient beings since beginningless time. Beginningless time is an important concept in Buddhism, and it comes up all the time. And it's a concept that many of us, probably all of us, have difficulty comprehending that idea of beginningless time. What all of us feel or seem to feel is that there must be a beginning. There has to be a beginning to all of this. There has to be something that generated it or created it or set the wheels in motion of existence, you know? And so we have all kinds of theories for that. And some of these theories are pretty valid, but they don't go far enough, you know? So this idea of there must be a beginning has been largely impressed upon us through frequent repetition and conditioning passed down from generation to generation, passed down by our predecessors. We are born into a world and into society that says there must be a beginning. And there are all kinds of ways of, theorizing what that beginning is. You know, for science, for a while, it was, the Big Bang, you know. For Hinduism, they have something like the Big Bang, but then they say there's also a big contraction. And then everything goes into a sort of a big dark state, and then Big Bangs out again. So it just keeps, going. For people who believe in God, well, God is the creator of everything. God is the one that started it all. So you can blame God for it. And some people do, I mean, some people do. So these theories are difficult, they're difficult to work for everybody. The first logical question that we should be asking ourselves is, why do we think there is a first cause? Why do we think that? Do any of us have an answer that we've given ourselves to why we think that there must be a first cause?
Your identification with ego.
Well, yeah.
If there's no first cause, then it means, what is this?
I think maybe I could.
Like, what is this?
But what you said about identification with ego, because what that identification is identifying with something that is self-existent, inherently existent. So we feel like, well, that's not a dependent arising. It must be, there's got to be something that caused that independent thing, right? It's a weird thing.
Well, it's interesting that you say that kind of, what is this? And I know this is getting too deep, but there's a prayer, Samantabhadra's prayer, and there's a phrase in there where they talk about sort of the beginnings of ignorance, and it's essentially that, and there's a moment that we all have this Buddha nature, which I'm sure we'll get into eventually, but it's a lack of mindfulness and awareness of that is kind of the cause of the original cause of that ignorance. And what happens is when we sort of stray from an awareness of our inherent of the true nature of reality, a subtle fear arises. And that subtle fear grows and grows and grows into a self and other. That's probably too abstract at this point.
I'm just if I just stick with what the Buddha says.
Yeah.
The Buddha said all beings arise from I grasping.
Yeah.
So what that's saying is, when you mention Buddha nature is a particular way of framing dependent arising.
Yeah.
All things arise dependently. So all the I grasping that beings have arises dependently. It is a dependent origination. But when we're talking about the label Buddha nature that's put on dependent arising, Buddha nature means there is a recognition that there is a choice. And in our ignorance, our beginningless ignorance, we do not recognize there's a choice at all. The Buddha himself says he started in beginningless ignorance, not recognizing that there was a choice one could make because of the nature of what dependent arising is. You can generate causes and conditions that are going to give you different results, because these causes and conditions are always arising dependently. So, and they're dependent really on limitless, everything is dependent on limitless causes and conditions. We can't see that right now. So Buddha nature is a specific way to use dependent arising. To use that term Buddha nature is saying we have the capacity within us, if we can harness that capacity and recognize what dependent arising is and what it's capable of doing, then we can go all the way to this enlightened being that is completely free of all this ego grasping and the suffering and the, you know, the negative karma that is generated by all of that. But it's a choice we make. It's not something that's destined from the beginning. Dependent arising, there's no choice. That's what it is. Everything is that way. We cannot change that. And so it's just that.
Getting back to your original question.
Yeah, yes. Why?
Well, I mean.
Why do we think there's a first cause?
Yeah, why do we think the first cause?
Yeah.
And, you know, our structure and our whole educational system is structured, our religious system, our educational system is structured towards presenting us with a generative event that leads to everything else.
Right.
So it's hard for anyone to kind of think, well, that's not how, and you know, you think about, you know, reproduction. I mean, you know, you have a new birth, whether it's in the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, or whatever. You take this, combine it, you build something, you create, it's, you know, there's a path you follow to. So, I mean, I think it's just the way that we've been brought up historically to look at how things occur from a variety of different contexts.
And a good, as a scientist, it's funny because a good illustration of that is where okay, like imagine yourself, you're a kid, somebody dies in an accident, tragic accident. And the kid said, why? Why did the accident? Well, because he was going in the wrong lane. Okay, cause and effect. Scientists say, okay, but why did he die? Well, he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Well, why wasn't he wearing a seatbelt? Well, I don't know. Or why was he sitting on that side? And it's like, well, I don't know. And at a certain point, and we keep going back, and then at a certain point, we just go, I don't know. You know, we say, well, we don't know. And Buddhism is saying, no, there is a reason why it was on that side. Like but we're always looking for that initial event, but it's almost like the innocence of a child knows to keep asking that.
Yeah.
Which is
Why?
kind of
Why?
amazing,
Why?
right?
Why? Why? Right.
And I think the Buddha would encourage that.
I think
keep
so.
asking. Like,
Keep asking. So that's what I did. I kept asking as I'm going through this process myself, right? Because, you know, beginningless time, I kept going, whatever that is, you know.
Well, also just our physiology and our evolution, our minds, our brain is more linear when we are habituated to certain levels of consciousness that our brains elicit. There are higher mind states that it's easier where the field kind of opens up, but just our physiology makes it.
Well, right, even in a lifespan,
beginningless.
you know, a lifespan that we look at, we can see, oh, this human being came into being, it was created by the parent, blah, 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 and then it dies. And that's all we see. We don't go further than that. We don't go, well, where was the human being before? Does the consciousness, does it go somewhere else? We kind of, basically the materialistic view would be, that's it. Just what you see is what you get. That's it. That's it. So this part of us thinks, well, there must be then a first cause to all of this. So, we asked ourselves, why do we think there's a first cause? Is there some reason there needs to be a first cause? That's the second question. Is there some reason that there needs to be a first cause? Do we ever even think of this?
exactly.
You know, I mean, I'm thinking this and going, I can't think of a reason why there needs to be a first cause, because you can see things are already underway, you know, in a dependently arising fashion. Things are coming into existence, going out of existence, being new, decaying, getting old, all that. We see that continually as occurring. So is there a need for a first cause in all of this? A first
So
cause.
when you say things come in and go out of existence.
What appears to us in a
Yeah.
material way. Yeah, this is what I'm saying. When we look at the world that I'm talking about, the world that we go, yeah, this is it, this is the real, this is solid, this is matter. You know? I don't even know about consciousness. Let's just say it's the brain, it's matter, and that's causing all of it. Well, we see that it's continues to cycle. It may not, we may not think it's the same consciousness cycle, but we'll just keep seeing.
Let me just, so in this concept of beginningless time in our universe,
Oh,
we argue now that our universe is continually expanding. Sometimes the black hole contract, right?
right.
So, but would you say that we say that because we don't have the capacity to see all that exists yet? And so we think we're limited by what we can observe.
Well, you have, you know, neither you or I with authority can say that, but you or I can both go, that's a possibility. That is a possibility because we actually don't see what scientists are finding now in quantum physics. We don't see the energy that all of this is made up of, the subatomic particles that are constantly in motion, constantly moving. So we can't say, but we can say, well, scientists say it's there, and maybe that's so. And maybe it's possible. That's the most I think you and I could actually say without experiencing it, having a direct experience ourselves of it.
But I guess I'm asking maybe a different question. The whole concept of beginningless time is that everything has existed since beginningless time.
I wouldn't say that everything has existed since, because it's always changing. It's always
It can
transforming.
change.
Yeah, okay.
That's fine. It can
Yeah.
change, modify.
And evolve, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah,
you know,
right.
But
Mhm.
basically, yeah. it
Right.
has-
All right.
So.
So is there a need then for a first cause?
Well. It probably philosophically you could say there's not an absolute need for a first cause, or that it's possible that there doesn't need to be a first cause. I mean, okay, fine. I guess I'm asking maybe, and maybe I'm not asking it correctly, I'm just kind of saying. If we say that if we say there's this concept of beginningless time, and all we know, all we understand, all we observe, all we realize, even in an ultimate sense, has therefore been around since beginningless time. So what I'm thinking is that we obviously don't see things from a Buddhist perspective correctly anyways, because we see conventional reality, not ultimate reality.
Yeah.
But, and I was using the universe as an example, but let's say we can only see 1/10 of the universe, and every 10 years we incrementally can see another.
I know, and we don't even know, right? Yeah.
But you would argue if beginningless time is correct, then the universe already exists, and whatever it exists, maybe changing, stars die, coming, whatever, even maybe expanding or whatever, contracting, but in some contextual way, it already exists in a kind of comprehensive, complete fashion or entity.
Well, then you get into the question of infinity.
But why isn't it actually harder to say that there is a beginning? Because I mean, in some ways, it's harder to say.
Yeah.
It's harder to point that out.
It is, because
I mean,
you're positing a
Right.
causeless.
Because there's always
cause.
energy, sort of whatever form it takes, and it may not be matter necessarily. If you go to subatomic, you don't even have time anymore. So I mean, it's like,
Right. Yeah, time again is a construct that we make. The linear thing you're talking about there. We think of time in a linear fashion, when really, if you think about it, the only time any of us ever experience is the very present moment, and it's gone. So it's a series of present moments. It's not this linear thing that we think, oh, it exists out there already, and it's a series of present moments. Even if one could time travel, right? Once you got there, you would be in the present moment for whatever it was. There's no way we can experience another moment other than the present moment, and it's constantly shifting.
But even the concept of every moment like a continuation of many moments is saying that there's a beginning and end to moments. The reality is that there's one moment, it's all.
One big moment.
I'm having a moment.
One big infinite moment.
And the more refined we get, it can be moment after moment after moment.
You just hit on something. Our awareness grasps at it, and that's what the Buddha says, the ego, this beginningless ignorance is grasping and trying to say, no,
That's.
I want to hold it and say, this is mine, I want to control it, I want to make it, put a little fence around it and say, this is my kingdom.
But are you gonna offer affirmative for
Wait,
beginningless time?
Well, I'm just going to offer more logical questions.
Okay, so you're gonna say, I can't reason out why there should not be beginningless time versus there should be a beginning.
No, I'm continuing, I've already gone through my
Yeah.
thought process, so I'm going to share.
It's-
I'm going to share with you my thought process, and then I want to see what you think about my thought process. Mine.
And Nagarjuna will do exactly what you just did, will analyze a moment, and then there's, about when does a moment start, when does it end? It's coming.
Okay, so actually, is there some reason there needs to be a first cause was part of the first logical question? It was a part of the first question, it is, all right, here's the second logical question that Christopher thinks we should be asking ourselves. If there is a first cause, how did it get there?
This is kind of like.
In other
what I
words,
was saying.
If there is a first cause, how did it come to be? This is a very logical question, and we should be asking it.
Okay, we will.
So how did it get there? If there is a first cause, how did it get there?
God put it there.
Well, then, all right.
Oh, it's God.
If you're saying God, no, let's go with that one, Kavita, because many people would say that.
I know.
So if you're saying God put it there, then how did God get there?
God, according to the Baltimore Catechism,
And this is-
his was and always has been.
So in other words,
God
God is beginningless.
Yes.
So we're able in some religions to go, oh yeah, beginninglessness is so, God is beginningless. And God then created everything. So then if God is beginningless, well then that creation that God created is part of a beginningless time. It is a sequence of beginninglessness, right? So let's take God out of it. Because that's only one, possibility. So, but this, so here's the next logical step I went to. Either the first cause is infinitely beginningless, such as a God, or the first cause arose from something other than itself. Those are the only
possible. Be a first cause. So
those are the those are the only possibilities though.
True.
Those are the only possibilities. Either the first cause is infinitely beginningless, or the first cause arose from something else. If the first cause is infinitely beginningless, then the concept of beginningless time is perfectly logical. If the first cause arose from something other than itself, then it's not really a first cause at all. That something else must be the first cause, which brings us back to the same pair of possibilities. Either the first cause is infinitely beginningless, or the phenomenon we're assigning a first cause to arose from something else that is infinitely beginningless. There is no other logical explanation of a first cause.
There's something in your question about infinitely beginningless.
Infinite, just infinite. Mathematically speaking, infinite is so.
That raises the question is whatever that is infinitely beginningless, changing or unchanging? Because if it's
Well, if it's
infinitely
infinite, then-
beginningless, that sort of implies that it doesn't change.
Does it? If it's infinite,
It has.
isn't change a possibility within infinity?
Yeah, yes, I guess I'm kind of
Still
falling back
true,
on the
still
God example of, oh, it doesn't, God doesn't change, God doesn't, that original cause doesn't change and it's always infinite, and it's like there's a logical disconnect there because
Mhm.
it has to change, like.
Like I
Or
heard
something.
God got bored and so.
Well, right, I mean, but even God, I mean,
changed.
even God, you would have to say, what we're told about God,
Yeah.
is not like a monolithic block that can't do anything. God
Right.
makes decisions, and so
Yeah.
that we're talking about impermanence there. That's what change is that it's not stuck like in stone, because God is never described that way. Like some monolith thing that can't even,
But then.
do anything.
But then playing devil's advocate, there would be if you're coming from that frame point of believing that God is the first cause, this infinitely beginningless God, then there is a beginning to the creation of creation. So there is a beginning in that frame.
However,
right?
if you're talking about in that framework, but you're
Right.
talking about dependent origination. So
Yeah,
a dependent
yeah,
origination is what this is. If God was
Yeah,
it arose from however God did it, right?
Right, yeah.
However they say it.
yeah, it still doesn't
But it's
negate dependent arising.
it doesn't negate dependent arising or beginningless.
Right.
I'm just
dependent
going to,
arising.
this is how a yogi reacts to our conversation.
Smile.
This is a little.
Anyway,
A yogi reacting to.
we're going to have to end it there because it's 12:31. We'll end it at beginningless time.
Okay, here's the SJ director reacting to the conversation.
But that's
That's
these
pretty funny.
these are the kind of questions that Buddhism trains us to ask.
And
That's the whole point. This is the whole psychological pathway to getting a grip on reality.
Oh, I got less of a grip than I had when I walked in here.
That's a good sign.
Is
It is a good sign because it's like Mary said last week, something's loosening up.
Yeah.
And we need to loosen up this grip that we've got on what we think it is.
gotta let
Well, I don't
go.
know
But
why.
it needs to be logical, because that's what we do.
Right.
So it's illogical. No, is that like,
Wait a minute, what are you saying?
well, I'm saying that maybe we should stop. You know, we're questioning because we're wanting, logically this can be or this can't be, but
But really, for me, it only came down to two possibilities.
And there's a wonderful, just quick plug, the Dalai Lama Housing book, and I can't remember, the subtitle is Faith Grounded in Reason.
Right,
And
right.
it's all about
faith-
using logic to
Right,
come to your faith.
And that's
needs
why
to-
you could have faith in something, because it is grounded in reason,
Right.
it is grounded in logic, then you go,
that-
I can put my faith in that. But blind faith is simply
Yeah.
belief in the validity of something that you can't even prove.
but what if you experience something that's
you haven't.
illogical? So you can explain it, but you have the embodied experience.
But there always will be an explanation. Ultimately, there will be an explanation. It may be not logical to us now, Like if we have an out-of-body experience, like, what the hell is that? Because I had one. It was terribly frightening and I had no idea what it was, but it happened and I experienced it. I actually saw another being. It was a monk. And I experienced this when I was a teenager. But I had no logical explanation for it, and yet it occurred. So of course, since then I've been on a quest for what the hell's going
The
on
challenge here is that all of this occurs in our minds.
within our consciousness.
Whether it really occurs.
He was with me right before the class, but he followed me out.
Mental way or, that's the challenge.
Absolutely, it's a challenge, and there are more. We will continue with this next time because there's a heck of a lot more that I want to get into. But okay, let's say closing prayer. And we'll just go ahead and we'll do these in English. And
This is making me actually rock. I'm very happy this is their kind of class. He really loves.
yeah, I know, he'd be with that face, that exact face.
I know.
All right, let's go ahead and say them in English so we know what we're saying. And it's at the bottom of page 2, beginning with the may the precious Bodhi mind, that mind of the awakened mind of the heart and mind that wants to become wise and enlightened for the benefit of all beings that we see are, we're all kind of lost in the stars here, trying to figure it out. And may that mind that wants to grow in wisdom and grow in compassion for the benefit of others, may that mind grow. So may the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. The next one is saying about the view of emptiness. And of course, the view of emptiness is the view of how dependent arising actually exists. What is dependent arising? Dependent arising is constantly, everything is constantly, moment to moment to moment, arising in a dependent fashion, and therefore is completely empty of any kind of independent, self-existent and existence at all. Completely empty of that. This is what emptiness is referring to. May the view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And then the final prayer, the final dedication, what we're talking about here, when they say, may we always meet with true lamas, true Buddhist lamas. What we're talking about here are representatives of the Buddha, representatives of the enlightened mind that have followed this lineage to the letter as much as possibly they can. Very, very wise, very consistent in their teachings and their knowledge, coming directly from the Buddha, passed down, teacher to teacher to teacher to student to teacher to student. So it's this lineage that represents the manifestation of the Buddha's knowledge and the pathway of psychology we're talking about for us. And may that we never be separated from that. So this is what this is saying. In all my lives, may I not be separated from true lamas, and so enjoy the splendor of Dharma, fully perfecting the virtues of levels and paths. May I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara. We won't go into all of that, but okay.
Well, thank you for a very stimulating discussion.
I think probably next week will be just as stimulating because there's
Yeah, we didn't get.
we didn't even get to the half of it. So yeah.
You've already read it, I guess.
No, she hasn't. I was
No,
up till like
I'm
3 or
reading
whatever.
this for me as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have had a little,
Preview.
some snippets here and there,
She
but
sees the smoke
mostly
coming out
when
of
I
my
see you
ears.
standing in the room going. That's
Einstein.
kind of what I was experiencing.
No, and those questions were great, and I wish somebody had presented that had put those like you just put them to me so much earlier.
Well, we're Westerners, and what Geshe-Nima told me, he said, make this accessible to the people of your culture, because he didn't know exactly how to do that.
But, and I had an exchange with him on email, and we can talk about that later, about why logic and debate is so important, and precisely to ask those questions, because we're not
even trained to.
Right.
We're not, oh, well, somebody told me this is what it is, and so that's what it is.
So anyway, well done.
And of course, as a scientist with a scientific kind of mind, you want to be asking those questions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there can actually be no valid progress in science.
And to your point, it's my favorite.
Okay, I'm done.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm ending the meeting here.
Favorite quote from Harry Potter.
Okay, well,
Harry Potter nerd. Harry goes, "Is this all real, or is it just happening inside my head?" Professor Dumbledore: "Of course it's happening inside your head, Harry. But why would that mean that it's any less real?"
Yeah.
Oh, that is a good one.
It's my favorite quote.
All right, we'll close with Harry Potter.
My greatest